All right. Welcome everyone to the Psychiatry academic seminar series. So we have Scott Griffiths here today. He's an NHMRC Early Career Fellow and a senior lecturer in the School of Psychology here at Melbourne Uni. And he heads the physical appearance research team. And he's going to be presenting to us today on eating and body image disorders, a bit of an update on your work, I guess, Scott. So thank you so much for agreeing to present. Super excited to hear about your work. So for those attending, please pop any questions in the Q&A as Scott is presenting, and then we'll go through them at the end and hopefully have some good discussion. So Scott, thank you again, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for coming along for the webinar. I haven't had a chance to talk to psychiatry school before, so yeah, thank you for the invitation. So I run the physical appearance research team in psychological sciences. We look at disorders for which physical appearance is a major aspect, so eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorders. We look at appearance enhancement from makeup through to cosmetic surgeries. And we also look at various appearance discriminations, things like racism, colorism, and weight stigma. For this talk today, I thought I would focus on the disordered part of it, so eating and body image disorders, and give you a sense of the ever-changing landscape of the eating disorder world. Okay. So, brief history of eating disorders is that the first credible English language description of one was in 1689 by an English physician. His name was Richard Morton, and he described two adolescents, one female, one male, who were physically wasting away despite having access to food. And in this and all subsequent accounts of anorexia for the next 250 years, appearance and body image are barely mentioned. Anorexia is usually described in the context of piousness. It's a self-restriction that one does in order to show devotion to God. Then, in 1874, Charles Lassalle and Sir William Gull coined the term anorexia. First time it appeared, but again, with no connection to appearance or body image. And the only reason it was called Anorexia Nervosa and not Anorexia Hysteria, as was originally proposed, was because the disorder seemed to afflict men, and this in effect legitimized it, and it was able to avoid the hysteria label that was pejoratively applied to all women who experienced psychological disorders. Fast forward 70 years, our two big psychiatry Bibles come out, 1952 and 1968, the DSM-1, the DSM-2. Anorexia is not recognized as a psychiatric disorder. Rather it's listed as a feeding disturbance under a section titled Special Symptoms Not Elsewhere Classified, and it doesn't have a text description. In 1973, the psychoanalyst Hilde Bruch publishes a landmark book in which she convincingly claims that anorexia is more than just a symptom, that it's more than just an inability to eat, that there are complex psychological processes that cause it to manifest and maintain. Increasing numbers of women are now seeking treatment, vastly increasing, and piousness very clearly has nothing to do with it. Our clinical accounts are complete with tales of body image woes, appearance pressures. It's clear that these are now the driving force of anorexia. And in 1979, Gerald Russell coins the second eating disorder, bulimia nervosa. Here, the cardinal symptoms are binge eating. It's where you eat a very large amount of food, an objectively large amount in a short amount of time, and you feel like you're out of control whilst you're doing it, that you can't stop. And then purging, just the compensatory behaviors to try and get rid of the calories you've consumed. You've just eaten all this food, and now you're feeling all this shame and guilt. So it can look like self-induced vomiting or taking laxatives or diuretics as examples. And body image is now very much the driving force of these eating disorders. In 1980, we get the DSM-3, and for the first time, anorexia and bulimia nervosa are recognized as psychiatric disorders. In 1994, we get the DSM-4, which adds binge eating disorder. So binge eating disorder is distinct from bulimia in that people eat a large amount of food and they feel out of control whilst they're doing it, but they don't compensate for the calories afterward. So you don't have the self-induced vomiting or the laxatives of diuretic use, etc. In 2013, we get the DSM-5, and changes here are in result to the increasing numbers of men that are suffering from eating disorders, including anorexia. So the criteria are adjusted. The criterion of amenorrhea, so the absence of menstruation, is removed as a diagnostic criterion for anorexia. Prior to this, it wasn't technically possible for men to be diagnosed with anorexia. The DSM-5 also brings with it a number of other eating disorders, like rumination disorder and pica. So this is the current crop, if you like. Anorexia nervosa, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, binge eating disorder, bulimia nervosa, our catch-alls of other specified eating and unspecified feeding or eating disorder, and rumination disorder. The ones you'll hear me talk most about in this webinar are anorexia, and another one that's not listed here, which we'll reveal in due course. So anorexia nervosa, the cardinal symptom is an intense clinical drive for thinness. You want to be thin at all costs. You eat very, very little. There's often precipitous drops in body weight to the point where an individual has medical instability. That medical instability can threaten life. The mortality rate for anorexia is higher than for any other psychiatric disorder. So despite the stigma of it being, a fanciful affliction that teenage girls will grow out of, it is actually incredibly lethal. If we look at the gender split of who suffers from anorexia, it accords with how you might expect. So these red dots here, or the red human representations, are males. 1 in 4 individuals with anorexia is a male. So the start of this interesting story I'm trying to tell you is when we look at eating disorder symptoms in men and women who are diagnosed with anorexia, the same disorder, we see huge differences in terms of the effect size for those symptoms. So this questionnaire here is the Eating Disorders Examination Questionnaire. This is a measure of eating disorder symptoms that you would find in well over half of eating disorder treatment centers around the world. When we put men and women with the same disorder assessed to the same level of clinical severity by interview, men score much less, and that effect size is large. So the implications of that for treatment and research are considerable. It also raises the question of why that's happening at all, because it really ought to not be. It shouldn't be that substantial. It happens if you look at other eating disorder symptom measures as well. This is the Eating Disorders Inventory 3. It's the second most popular symptom measure of eating disorders. And again, we find that there is a large effect size for individuals ostensibly diagnosed with the same disorder at the same level of severity. Part of the reason for this might be because very little eating disorders research has been dedicated to boys and men. Around 1% in the most recent review we did of this literature is dedicated to boys and men. 99% has been with girls and women. And the reason why that might be important is because men typically don't want to look like women. We can show this. We asked about 2,700 gay men that we recruited through Grindr nationwide, all around Australia. We said, hey, what's the actual body that you have? And what's the ideal body that you want? We gave them this somatomorphic matrices of male bodies so we could visualize it for readers and for listeners. You can see that the actual body that gay men in this country have tends to be in the bottom right triangle of this graph. These are bodies that are lower in muscularity, higher in body fat. The ones they want are in the top left. And if we look at the mean representation, This is the actual body that the average gay man in this country has, and this is the body that they want. So there is a discrepancy here. It is not in the direction of being thin and skinny. So as an exercise, what we did is we took the eating disorders examination questionnaire, again, most widely used symptom measure of eating disorders in the world, and we reversed the polarity of some of the questions, right? So instead of asking things like, have you been trying to limit the amount of food that you eat, right, in order to influence your shape of weight, we had questions like, oh, have you been trying to increase the amount of food that you eat? So those circles around the numbers are the actual responses of an individual that we clinically diagnosed with muscle dysmorphia, right? Which I'll explain about in a little bit more. Here, the drive isn't for thinness, it's for muscularity, because we just wanted to get a sense of what these symptom measures might be missing out on. If we use the original EDEQ questions and we average out the scores that this individual has, they score a 0.9, the scale goes up to 6. At that level, they're not screened into anything. They're considered low risk, negligible risk. We don't detect them. But with our reversed polarity questions, other questions like, instead of have you felt fat, have you felt puny? Have you had a strong desire to lose weight becomes have you had a strong desire to gain muscle? Suddenly the answers go from 0 to 6 in a lot of the cases. And at an average of 3.8, this person is screened in for treatment, or at least for an interview. And it's very likely this person would end up being eligible for treatment at that point. So this disorder, muscle dysmorphia, you can think of it as the clinical manifestation of a drive for muscularity rather than a drive for thinness, because a lot of what we know about eating disorders has been informed by this, latent assumption that the bodies that people want are thin and skinny. But there are pressures, as I'll describe, for a lot of young people in particular that are compelling them to want to have muscle as well. Unsurprisingly, when you look at the gender split, muscle dysmorphia is around 90 to 95% men. It could be that women are actually underrepresented here. It's challenging, I think, to get research done in general in this space, but to do research with women on muscle dysmorphia, much as it is to do research on anorexia with men, but this is around where the data are. So I thought I would present some of the qualitative data we've only recently collected. My PhD student, Jordan Martinston, has done a phenomenal job of recruiting a clinical sample of individuals with muscle dysmorphia. We've confirmed their diagnosis in a literature that has predominantly non-clinical undergraduate samples, which don't provide as much information. Because I wanted to give you a sense of what muscle dysmorphia looks like so that you can see the analogies to anorexia, and then you can see how eating disorders are this moving target. Okay, the cardinal symptom of muscle dysmorphia is an intense and enduring preoccupation with being muscular. As you read those quotes, Daniel, Liam, Lachlan, Lucas, they're all talking about their muscles. They want their arms, their shoulders, their chest to be big. They're at the point where the gym and their diet is such a controlling force in their life that it feels like the only thing that's keeping them going. In anorexia, this is what occurs with thinness and all of the dieting and the training that goes along with trying to reduce or expunge your calories so that you can continue to lose weight. It becomes it consumes the entirety of your being trying to get it done. A lot of people presume that in anorexia, muscle dysmorphia, that people must really dislike their bodies, but they often do, but it goes up and down because sometimes you feel like you have a win. In muscle dysmorphia, when these guys have just done a workout, right? They can see themselves in the mirror. They have a lot of blood being pumped into the muscles because they've just been worked. They call it the pump. That's when they feel really good, right? They desperately want to be muscular. They look like it at that point. And yeah, that's when they feel good. But then, they wake up in the morning, let's say, where you're glycogen depleted. So the energy source for muscles, you're a little bit dehydrated, you look physically smaller, and they hate it. They really feel miserable at that time. Interestingly, in anorexia, in the morning, they tend to feel better about themselves because that's when you weigh the least. You're a bit dehydrated. You haven't had a chance to eat anything, so your stomach doesn't have any protrusions. They're feeling pretty good. They feel worse as the day goes on. In muscle dysmorphia, if you want to put on muscle, you have to both bulk, so eat more calories than you would burn so that you can build the muscle tissue, and then you have to cut. You have to lose body fat so the muscles will be revealed. This means eating less calories than you otherwise would. In anorexia, it's one long cut. The goal is always to eat less than you consume because you want to drop the weight. In muscle dysmorphia, they're constantly oscillating between the two, and their body dissatisfaction is fluctuating all the time. These guys will say things like, I know I have to eat more to build the muscle, but then I see my weight going up and I feel like I'm gaining body fat, and then I think I'm fat, and then I have to cut the calories again. So they're always oscillating. There's also perceptual distortions. That cartoon representation of muscle dysmorphia I showed you before was a bodybuilder looking in a mirror, seeing someone scrawny look at them, well, reflected back at them. In anorexia, this happens a lot. In anorexia, a person with a BMI in the low double digits can look me in the eye and with genuine credulity tell me that they're grotesquely overweight. And in muscle dysmorphia, these guys will often look in the mirror and they see themselves changing. They're like, oh, I'm feeling bad about myself, and I swear I look tiny. I look puny in this mirror. They avoid their body being seen. So these guys will often not want to be at the beach. They don't want to be at swimming pools. If they go to the physio because they've got an injury, they'll wear really baggy clothes and they won't take their top off. We even had one guy, Lachlan, tell us that he wouldn't take advantage of an overseas trip to see a mate because it would be in a hot location and there would be a chance that he would have to take his top off. It's important to realize that this kind of stuff at this point of clinical severity is impacting upon functioning. We will get into that in due course. So you may recall on the symptom measure, we replaced one of the items with you're trying to eat as much as possible because you have to eat more than you normally would. So instead of having people who are trying to lose weight and trying to eat as little as they can, these guys are pushing through the nausea of force feeding themselves and feeling like they want to vomit because that's how you build muscle. There's always calorie counting. This is just the same as in anorexia. Every calorie gets logged. When you have to log all of your food, when you're thinking about it that much, what often occurs is that you get a reduction, a constraint in the amount and variety of food that you eat because it's so exhausting to do. So they end up eating the same things. You get a lot of nutritional imbalances, and it's hard, And when these guys don't meet their calorie target, it's not just a small thing. There's a lot of shame there. There can be a lot of anger, a lot of lashing out. And mirror checking. In anorexia, what causes huge amounts of distress is the scale. It's your body weight, because that number always needs to be going down. It needs to be as low as possible. But the scale isn't as useful in muscle dysmorphia because you could be 60 kilos, but most of it could be muscle or most of it could be body fat. And if you are trying to build muscle, lose body fat depending, you could be doing that but stay the same weight. So if you can't jump on the scale, what can you do? You just check mirrors, constantly flexing and checking mirrors. We're talking, on average 10 times a day. A lot of guys are 20, 30, 40 times a day when you really push them on how often it is. Some guys can't even give you a number because it's just constant. It's endless checking and appearance criticisms. That said, there still are a lot of stresses around checking weight. In anorexia, when it's severe, the attitude toward scales goes in one of two directions. It can be, I need to be on the scale multiple times a day so I know exactly what's happening with my body weight. Or it can be, I'm terrified of being on the scale. I never want to be on a scale ever again. And you see this in muscle dysmorphia too. You have guys who are checking multiple times a day, and you have guys who are avoiding them at any cost. Both are issues. Unique to muscle dysmorphia is the obsession with protein. So protein in the minds of many young people is synonymous with muscle. I'm willing to bet that you listening here probably associate protein with building muscle as well. So these guys are always thinking about it. They can disregard carbohydrate and fat to an extent, but protein is never, ever disregarded. And here I'd like to pivot and show you something. When anorexia and bulimia were becoming driven by body image in the previous century, we had a proliferation of low-fat, fat-free, and low-carb foods. Look at the color schemes of these. Now, to be granted, I have picked these from Google image search, but you can do your own search. They're not cherry-picked. The colors are what you call stereotypically feminine because they're playing into a synonymization among women that low fat means not putting on weight. There has also been more recently a proliferation of high protein foods. The color schemes here are blues and blacks. They're playing on what is a synonymization between protein and muscle in the minds of men. And this extends through to protein supplements too, which copy this same color scheme and have terms like combat protein powder, carnivore. They're trying to capture that same demographic, cater to that same anxiety. Okay, so I want to impress upon you that there is a distinction between being someone who, quote unquote, wants to take care of their body, be in the gym, diet, and muscle dysmorphia. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with dieting, training, exercising. That's all well and fine. What makes muscle dysmorphia a disorder is that it is impairing. So Daniel, for example, in order to accommodate his dieting and his training, he's had to drop all of his social circles. He just can't have them. He couldn't be in a restaurant with his mates because he couldn't eat the food because he didn't know what the calorie or protein content of it. For Matt, it's cost him relationships because he's really obsessive about it, big mood swings around it. He was bringing his own food to restaurants, just a constant stress, and couldn't be able to let go of it, and costing him. What often happens in eating disorders is that as exercise and dieting become more and more of your life, and your existing social circles and romantic relationships are full of friction because of that, you socially integrate into those communities. So Graham here, he moved his friendships from out of the gym to people already in the gym. It allows you to put in his case, the 3 hours of gym time a day while still having some connection. You see this online in pro-anorexia communities. You might have heard about this. They're online communities. There are plenty of them on Instagram, TikTok, the big social media sites where people who are in the throes of anorexia and other eating disorders share tips about how to lose weight, about how to trick the scale if you're in an inpatient treatment environment and you need to, deceive the people taking care of you that you're putting on weight. It forms a community of like-minded individuals, but it entrenches the problem because they're not trying to get out of it. They're trying to push back against those trying to help. These physique goals are much more important than health. These guys often recognize it. They're like, yeah, maybe I told myself at a point that I was doing this to be healthy. And it's pretty common to hear this from guys who are ambivalent about change. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, they're not really valuing their health because they'll rattle off a list of issues that are plaguing them. very common one is that guys will push through training injuries because the pain of the injury is considered preferable to the anxiety of losing muscle and progress when you're out of the gym. Low self-esteem is at the heart of a lot of this. The training, the dieting gives a sense of control. Maybe there was a childhood bullying experience, like with Gabriel, describing someone in school coming up, putting their fingers around his wrist to be like, oh, look at you, you're so puny, etc. And then that has stayed with him, and a way of regaining self-esteem or feeling like you're in control was to hit the gym and to do that. I'll also say that hit the gym is one of the most common pieces of advice given to young men on male-oriented internet communities when they have suffered a hardship. When a guy has gone through a breakup, for example, they'll say, time to hit the gym, bro. Because the gym is the easy stand-in for the actual emotional work that would allow them to push past and perhaps develop a little more thoughtfully. This self-esteem issue gives rise to unhelpful beliefs. People will start to think, oh, you know, I reckon if I did lose my muscularity, my partner would leave me, or people will respect me less. And what's really challenging here is that eating disorders exist in a context where broadly there are social rewards for looking the way they feel compelled to. People do tend to respect men who are more muscular than who are not. People do tend to be more attracted to women who are thinner than who are not. It is incredibly challenging to try and go up against these very entrenched beliefs when, as a young woman, for example, is losing weight in the throes of anorexia, she's noticing that she's getting more attention from the sex that she's attracted to. And then muscle dysmorphia, because of these ego-syntonic beliefs, it becomes part of your identity. Like, I'm an exerciser, I'm a dieter, I care about my health, I want to self-actualize. So you're not just trying to get rid of the disorder, you're challenging an entire way of life. If you've met people who are like really big supporters of a particular diet, or you've gone on online communities where people are, you know, are flying the flag for their particular way of eating, people are very, very vocal supporters of what they believe in. So you get things like, yeah, look, I know there's negative health effects, but it's better than being obese, right? Everyone in the world is fat, and I'm not like that, so it's not so bad. The discourse around body weight, which is framed as things like war on obesity, etc., is so incredibly unhelpful to young people who interpret that as, man, if I get fat, no one's going to respect me, no one's going to date me, and no one's going to love me. God, that can really push you in the direction of these eating disorders quite easily. So yeah, there are a lot of ego-syntonic beliefs and rationalizations. These are some of the hardest things to challenge in the context of treatment. And of course, anabolic steroids, a huge difference. In anorexia, if you take laxatives and diuretics in order to lose weight, they don't really work. They just don't expunge calories in the way people think they do. So the public relations challenge there is not as bad, because we can say, yeah, look, I mean, maybe I can't convince you that it's bad for you, but they don't work. But anabolic steroids, unfortunately for us, work so well. A lot of these guys use steroids, around 50%, and naturally they think about it a lot. It truly is just a matter of time when you're in these spaces thinking this way until you use them. So for anyone who hasn't seen them, these are anabolic steroids. Those blue love hearts are what Arnold Schwarzenegger called the breakfast of champions before he became the governor of the great state of California, took down his posters in Gold's Gym. And you take steroids in a cycle. So here I've made it 12 weeks. 12 weeks is on the short side for a beginner's cycle of steroids. And I want to impress upon you now just how effective they are. So here is the first study that showed the tremendous effectiveness of steroids. This is testosterone enanthate. This is the most widely available steroid in Australia. It'll cost you $200 for a vial. You need 3 vials for a beginner steroid cycle, so $600. On the y-axis, on the left graph, is change in fat-free mass. This is how much muscle mass you put on. On the right is change in fat mass. So this is body fat. If we look at 25 to 50, testosterone enanthate, this is about what someone makes naturally, right? So I wouldn't expect change here. It's about what you're already making. But at 600, you're putting in an amount of testosterone into your body, right? And anabolic steroids are just synthetic testosterone at their most basic level. You're putting in an amount that is not only well above what a human can make naturally, it is almost exactly what a beginner steroid cycle prescribes you to take. So beginner steroid cycle, if you search for it on the internet, 500 to 600 milligrams of testosterone enanthate a week. So these guys who were randomized to receive these doses of steroids, one of them, after 20 weeks, they put on 8 kilos of muscle and lost 1 kilo of body fat. But the real kicker in this study is they didn't do any weight training. They did this with just light cardiovascular exercise limited to, say, walking to work and a reasonably standard caloric diet, maybe a small surplus. So they built that essentially just going about their daily lives. That is an incredibly attractive proposition for people who are wrapped up in the size of their muscles. And it's honestly a public relations nightmare to try and compel guys not to use. And it gives rise to this psychology. These guys are health conscious, right? Most people who use steroids are not willy-nilly about it. They know that they're not real good, but they want to do best for themselves. That's why they care about their dieting and their training so much. So they say, look, I'll do 1 or 2 cycles. I'll get jacked, I'll get big, and then I'm done. So if you say that, you're saying I might use for 6 months. But when we look at the actual length of time that guys spend on roids, it's 66 months. It's about 5.5 years. Because you can imagine that if they're that effective and the reason you're using them is because you're so stressed and anxious about the size of your muscles, why would you come off? Because you know what's going to happen when you come off. You are going to deflate. There's no chance that you can hold on to that because testosterone is such a powerful synthesizer of muscle tissue. Unsurprising, around 1/3 of guys with muscle dysmorphia are dependent on anabolic steroids. They use more than they intended to. If they want to stop, they find that they can't. And then there's an intolerance of the gains that they get. They get here with the goalposts, and then 6 months later, it's not enough, and it's not enough, and it's not enough, it's not enough. The side effects mount. They discount the side effects. The dependency is entrenched. Okay, back to the disorder. Social comparison is really one of the root maintaining and precipitating factors of this disorder. Same for anorexia. These guys, when they're in a gym, they compare themselves to everyone. And unlike someone who doesn't have an eating disorder or muscle dysmorphia, when they see someone who they think is superior to them in some sense, muscle, ability to lift weight, they internalize that and use it to punish themselves. It really hurts them. It's not just like, oh, that guy's big, or oh, that girl's skinnier than me. It hurts them. And they tend to do a lot of these comparisons. And at this point, I want to do another pivot and show you how the environment of exemplars to which you can compare yourself has been becoming increasingly challenging for men, just as it has for women. So I don't have time to go into them, but there's plenty of research showing that, dolls for women, media representations for women were becoming further and further away from what the average woman looked like. And what this meant is that all of the bodies that you can compare yourself to as you're growing up and seeking a reference point for how you are meant to look, you're coming out on the negative end of a greater proportion of those comparisons. So when we look at representations of male bodies, we see the same thing. These are, I'm going to talk about some research on action figurines. as one representation of male bodies out there in the broader world. So this is Luke Skywalker and Han Solo from the original release of the Star Wars trilogy. This is how they looked in the re-release. Mark Hamill was rumored to have said when he saw these, like, my God, they put me on steroids, because he's got a bodybuilder pose, he's got exposed pecs. The actors don't look like how they are on the right. And you can see this for a number of different extremely popular action and comic book heroes. And all it does is mean that these reference for the appearance comparisons that young people tend to make more than older people, they're on the losing end of more and more of it. Even heroes that were never known for being particularly strong or muscular become that way. And some of the stories and narratives that we maybe unwittingly tell young people only make this more clear. Take Captain America, for example, hugely popular film, grossing hundreds of millions of dollars. The character is thin and he's disrespected by his friends and he can't get a date, and he's by all accounts considered sickly by characters around him. In his desperation, he agrees to a procedure which is life-threatening, as it said in the movie, and then he becomes jacked and now he can get dates. He's literally a hero, right? That procedure is an analogy for anabolic steroids. And, you know, you and I listening to this, we can perhaps pass this and see through it. But you know who goes to see these movies? Like 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, they don't necessarily know that. They're just sponges picking up on what is considered desirable, attractive, respectable, etc. And the problem has been made so much worse by social media. I wish I could talk more about what we're doing in this space, but there's just never enough time. So right now we do a lot of research with TikTok. I'm incredibly online. I have multiple TikTok accounts, Instagrams, Twitter, because I need to know what is happening out there in these communities. And it means that I'm privy to the nuances of the algorithms on these different social media platforms. The algorithm on TikTok is so much more powerful than Instagram that it honestly makes Instagram look like an entirely primitive technology. And these guys are acknowledging that. You know, they're saying like, you know, I'm on YouTube, I'm on TikTok. It's interesting you ask that, because I think one of the big things that cause the most muscle dysmorphia symptoms is actually social media. It just keeps coming up in all of the narratives. Take Gabriel, for example. He's like, yeah, my social media is people that have like sub 10% body fat, really big muscles. The reason why it keeps popping on my feed is because, you know, I do like to consume that media, like fitness stuff. But for some reason, the algorithm's like, oh, I want to see more on my For You page. That's TikTok's central page. So in fact, you know, I have to limit the amount and then I delete it, but then I download it again. And, you know, there's not much benefit to it. He's saying that, you know, it's not good, but then I'm back on it. That happens all the time. Most young people have uninstalled their social media apps and then reinstalled them. What is occurring here is that when you're on, say, TikTok, it registers how long you look at content, if you interact with content, say liking, commenting, replying, but you just your eyeballs on it, looking at it for longer than other content. TikTok goes, hey, cool, I'm going to send more of this to someone. You will, if you're anxious about this stuff, spend more time looking at it. So it sends you more and it sends you more. You become embedded in it. The reference to which you are comparing yourself become increasingly fitspiration influencers, fitness models, etc. Suddenly you're bombarded with it. The proportion of appearance comparisons that you're on the losing end of skyrockets. And you don't necessarily know that your view is so siloed because it's tailored to you. You don't have other people's TikTok accounts. All right. So I'm at 42 minutes. I feel like I will wrap up a little earlier than I thought, just in case there's questions. I will just say, I won't get on TikTok. I'll just talk on our big data Twitter stuff. So as I said, we try and do a lot of work with social media. We have at present the largest geolocated database of tweets anywhere in the world with 4.6 billion tweets from 2012 to 2019. And what we wanted to know in this study was, are there seasonal differences in the frequency that these tweets are being made? Because we were like, this stuff seems to come out in spring and summer when people are stressed about having to be at the beach, at the swimming pool. They can see more of their body because they're taking off more clothes, wearing shorts, t-shirts, dresses. That's when dieting should spike. And that's what we found. And you can track it down to temperature at a state and city level. And sure enough, minimum average temperatures drive the frequency of dieting tweets. But that's actually secondary to what I wanted to know. Something that really we found super compelling was an exploratory hypothesis we had in this. Some diets are motivated by appearance. Some diets are motivated by a blend of appearance and non-appearance concerns. And then some are motivated by environmental, animal, or gastrointestinal welfare concerns. We should only be seeing a seasonal fluctuation in our appearance-oriented diets. There's no reason for vegan and gluten-free and FODMAP to be spiking in spring, but they all do. Every single diet behaves the same way as our appearance-oriented diets. Vegan spikes, gluten-free spikes, low FODMAP spikes. And we think it's because these diets that are ostensibly not about appearance nonetheless are. People may not even be aware that part of the reason why they're doing these things is because they low-key do want to lose weight or put on muscle. There's also the issue of the huge amount of moralization we've imbued what you eat, or just imbued it into what you eat. The fear-mongering around obesity and the focus on clean eating, natural, organic, etc., means that there's this toxic package of challenge for people to disentangle why it is that they want to diet. Here is an exemplar of a woman who cared for her daughter with anorexia. She says, I'm 100% convinced that my daughter's request to follow a vegan diet was driven by illness. Through her whole life, I ensured that the family had a healthy and balanced diet that included treats and party food. In our house, no food was a bad food, so she tried to get rid of the moralization. But the daughter, prior to being diagnosed with anorexia, said she wanted to cut out meat and then fish and then eggs. And within 3 months, she wanted to become vegan. And now after that, they're in a good place. But she's since admitted guiltily she never wanted to be a vegan, and her illness drove her to pursue this as a way of restricting. And the term guiltily in there implies that this person was deliberately deceiving. And I don't think that was the case at all. I think when you're in the throes of this, you do rationalize that, oh, I'm doing it for this reason, right? There's a reason why so many people with muscle dysmorphia, eating disorders, are on very specific diets that often, in theory, have nothing to do with appearance. They're like a shield. They shield you from the concerns of health professionals and parents and loved ones about why it is you're doing what you're doing, because the disorders are egosyntonic. They're trying to protect themselves. All right, I think I've gone over time, and I apologize. I just get animated talking about this stuff. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate the invite.
I think there should be a clap, which obviously can't happen with a webinar. Thank you so much, Scott. That was so interesting. So people listening in, please pop any questions in the Q&A. There is one in there that I'll read up for you, Scott. Shouldn't we have a right to be able to edit the kinds of media images that are shown to us via algorithm suggestions without completely deleting apps? We don't have that choice.
Yeah, you're right. What the social media companies do, TikTok, Instagram, they make the option to say, I don't like this content, frictionful. It's very frictionless to like, comment, or to post something that generates the kind of conflict that they count as engagement. That's their core business. You resisting things like advertising posts, things you don't want to see that you nonetheless are very engaged with, that keep you coming back. That's not in TikTok's interest. They want you to spend as much time on that app as possible. So yes, it's incredibly frustrating that we don't get more control over our social media environment, and also that we have no sense of how different our environment is to everyone else's. It skews what we think is normal hugely.
Mm. Do you have there been, or do you think there would be any kind of, from researchers or whoever, some kind of petitions or movements to, change the way that these social media sites do things? I mean, I can't imagine that they ever would, but
there are. If you want to get a sense of the divide between how social media companies portray what they're doing and what drives their actual decisions, do a Google for something called the Facebook Papers. Anytime whistleblowers reveal how it is that social media companies foster engagement or what they're focused on, the narratives are always the same. The companies ostensibly don't want young people getting hot housed into social media environments where they are actively harming themselves. But behind the scenes, it's what generates profit. It's the advertising money that comes in. What generates that? It's eyeballs on the screen. What drives the eyeballs on the screen? It's conflict and engagement. Engagement is your anxieties, the things that upset you, the things that make you angry. If you take that stuff away, you end up on a different social media site. That's their worry. So they will tell you one thing because it's PR, but what is occurring internally, very different. Extremely frustrating.
Yeah, so problematic. Some other questions or a comment from Maddie. This was really insightful. Thank you. From Ali, it may be too soon for the research, but with the restrictions of gyms during COVID, have you found more men are seeking the steroid route to gain muscle because they can't seek it elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, needle syringes in this country this year have recorded their largest spike in first-time users who are using anabolic steroids. We had double to triple digit increases in calls to eating disorder helplines in this country during the pandemic, and also for eating disorder services overseas, because people's avenues to feel like they're in control of their dieting and exercise to service their appearance goals, they lost that control. So then you start to say, what am I going to do? I need the laxatives, I need the diuretics, I need the anabolic steroids. So your intuition, absolutely correct, that all of this nexus of toxicity intensified during that time.
And do you think that's also partly due to just people being more stressed about other things? I presume that's her.
It's partially that, and unfortunately for us, young people who couldn't leave their house and interact with their friends in real life were also on social media more than they ever were. Constantly. So many of their interactions were mediated by social media. You combine that with the inability to do or to feel in control of their appearance, which they're constantly comparing themselves to now, really a very awful toxic soup explaining why things have intensified the way they have.
And I presume just generally over time with increased social media use, there's been a corresponding increase in eating and body image disorders.
Yeah. They've been rising for some time. As I said, anorexia, bulimia, muscle dysmorphia probably didn't even exist because I think pressures on men in terms of appearance because of patriarchal structures just weren't there. We've created environments where people feel increasingly pressured on appearance. So eating disorders, they're moving targets. They have changed how they manifest. And if it wasn't social media, it was traditional media increasingly portraying bodies that were more discrepant to the average person. And now social media just sits on top of what we're seeing in traditional media, such that for a lot of young people, they don't have any sense of what an average body looks like. like there's no, where do they see it? There's no average bodies. And if they are there in movies or on TV, they're often the butt of jokes. They're not the star. They might be the friend who's, a bit of a joke, disrespected in some way, and they pick up on that.
Mm. Yeah, I was thinking about the Kim Kardashian body.
Yeah.
You were talking about some of that.
And the reach of a Kardashian eclipses anything any health professional could ever do. Ever. That's, imbalance of power is substantial there.
Another question, any idea on what could be the percentage of muscle dysmorphia amongst regular gym attendees?
Oh, good question. So this one I'd like to see the available literature get a bit more rigorous, but in a metropolitan gym in Melbourne, you're looking at around 10 to 15%. It's where you're going to get a lot more guys like that. We see similar things with anorexia and eating disorders too, more represented in gyms. Unfortunately, the big fitness franchises are often reluctant to engage with this issue because their core business is at odds with efforts that would compel people to be more comfortable with their appearance and their bodies as is. And when it comes to things like anabolic steroids, their first claim is just, we don't have that problem in our gym. So we can't help. It's frustrating. A lot of independent gyms are much better in those respects. And there are a lot of independent gyms now which are really meaningfully trying to help people achieve dieting, exercise goals in as healthful a manner as possible. And a lot of fitness influencers as well are trying to do good things in this space. It's not a homogenous group of bad actors at all.
Any other questions, please pop them in the Q&A. Scott, I was going to ask you about the effects of anabolic steroids on the brain, which I know there's work out there. I was going to ask you about young people, adolescents in particular. Has there been much work there looking at the impacts of steroid use on brain development in?
So high doses of anabolic steroids are neurotoxic in rats, and in the few studies of cognitive differences between long-term anabolic steroid users and non-users, there have been differences in areas like the visuospatial sketchpad, and those effect sizes have been large. So what it looks like is that high supraphysiological doses of testosterone are altering the brain in meaningful ways, and those persist into adulthood.
Scary.
Yeah, none of it's great news, but neither of us are in disciplines that are full of great news. Lots of disorders.
There's another question here from Gabby. What do you think is the most effective step that the public health system could take to combat these disorders?
I think when it comes to the first port of call, so your general practitioners, most people are going to see, psychoeducation is one of the more important, because it is very easy, I think, to interpret someone who tells you they're dieting, who ostensibly has a healthy body weight, or is, maybe if they're a woman, lower than an expected body weight, or a guy who walks in is quite muscular, to interpret that as healthy. It's like a pat on the back. Hey, good on you, you're doing the right thing. That moralization is part of the issue. It's what drives people to that. And I think thoughtful questioning and psychoeducation for GPs about what to look for would be really helpful there. The other part for mental health professionals, so psychologists, psychiatrists, especially ones in the public health system, when it comes to anorexia and what I'm going to call thinness-oriented eating disorders, it's us convincing them that they already have all of the techniques to assist with these new eating disorder manifestations. If you can handle anorexia, you can handle muscle dysmorphia. That a guy might come into the room and you're like, I don't know anything about steroids or lifting weights or protein supplements. But as I hoped I showed with all those analogies, the core underlying beliefs and attitudes, it's actually the same. It's just a different manifestation. So we're fortunate in the sense that we've already got the mental health group who can do it. They absolutely can do it. We just have to bring them up to speed on, what a steroid cycle is. Why gym users care about protein so much, stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I imagine in schools, like having teachers and the wellbeing officers.
Yeah. We work with the Butterfly Foundation, and we've got a number of school interventions that have been implemented and peer reviewed, where we have boys and girls going through modules in their PDHPE classes, learning about appearance pressures, about how social media is not an accurate reflection, about how social media is like funneling things for you to see, that it's not necessarily real. A lot of that stuff's it's quite warmly received by kids, because as you might have noticed in those quotes I provided, they kind of do know that social media is not great for them. They actually do, but they can't articulate why. And they also find it very difficult not to get back on because all their friends are on. So the more you equip them with the ability to critically appraise what they're seeing, the more they can stop internalizing the kind of stuff that might compel them to develop an eating disorder.
Yeah, 100%. There is one more question. We'll do that one and then I think we'll be at one. So from Anita Lawrence, I teach third years a human nutrition unit. For one day of the assignment, students are asked to complete a 4-day weighted food record. Would this adversely impact students with and without eating disorders? Should we change the assignment?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It is the fact that there are huge numbers of Australians who worry about their weight, like huge numbers. The act of weighing oneself is not a simple recording exercise. It is packaged in with worrisome attitudes and feelings and beliefs for quite a large number of people. Any exercise you're going to give, though, is balanced up against the educational merit of it. If the educational merit of what you're doing requires that you do the weighing, and you think that the potential discomfort or distress it might cause is, small relative to the educational merit, then I could see it as being okay. I'm not intimately familiar with your area of education, so I don't want to imply that you just outright shouldn't. My gut feeling is there probably are ways to do it without having people weigh themselves, but yeah, again, I don't want to be prescriptive there.
Maybe if you don't mind, Scott, Anita might like to email you to.
Yeah, sure.
Get some advice.
Sure. And then kudos to you for reflecting on it.
Yeah. Okay, we've hit one. So Scott, thank you so much again for such an interesting and engaging presentation. Fantastic.
Cool.
And
thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Sarah.
No problem. And thanks to all the attendees that joined. All right.
Okay. Bye. Till next time.